The goal of this movie night is to raise awareness of coastal concerns and encourage an open discussion across the North Island Pell River riding about the federal Alberta Memorandum of Understanding to build a pipeline through northern BC to the north coast for shipping across the Pacific Ocean. This project would contravene the oil tanker ban in practice since 1972 and which was finally legislated into law in 2019. The ban covers an area that stretches from the southern tip of Vancouver Island to the BC-Alaska border. It includes the waters that surround the Nipper Federal Riding, which includes 20 First Nations communities who would be the first responders in any shipping emergency. First Nations communities assert that removing the oil tanker ban would put our coastlines, communities, and oceans at great risk. The communities of Bella Bella and Kayukut have already experienced oil spills that have required complex operations to mitigate ongoing damages to their territorial waters. The title we chose for this event, A Silent Ocean, raises the issue of who will speak for the ocean that surrounds us. So I'd like to welcome back again our panelists, Shane Pollard and Katarina Duke. Kat, I'd like to go to you first. If you could be in one of these films, which one would it be, and what would you be doing in it?
Hello, everyone, again. My name is Katarina, or Kat. I'm the manager of marine conservation and fisheries for Cayucot Checklisset First Nations, and I have been in this role for about 4 years. So I deal with anything to do with the water, whether it's freshwater or marine. Um, and alongside that, I am working on my PhD. So busy, busy times. Um, the question is a hard one because I do love paddleboarding and I'm trying to learn to surf, but um, I would think right now I would probably go with the first movie with the hat guy on the hydrophones. And the main reason why is that recently I spoke to an elder from the Checklisset side of the territory, and they had mentioned that there were like transformation stories of orcas, which are called Kakowin in New Chelna, and that there was one Kakowin that actually landed ashore and it turned into a human shape and it basically formed the family structure of the New Chalnoth people, like the strength in the family, like the pod and the importance of the chief, the pod leader. And then there's other stories where you see the Kakowin are offshore and those are actually reincarnated chiefs that are basically protecting the people of Cayuga and Checklisset territories while they're at sea. So for me, I'm kind of leaning towards that one because we also don't have any hydrophone data at all in the territory. KCFN is often a data deficit area. It doesn't get much attention from the government. And we've been constantly battling, trying to get funding to actually put hydrophone data in because we're one of the few areas that, if you look at heat maps for the coast, we have like the least vessel traffic right now, but based on projections, it's going to gradually increase drastically. And it would be nice to have that baseline data so we can prevent impacts to the whale populations that we have, specifically like our transients, which are a really unique species because they actually navigate in complete silence. They don't really use echolocation because of their prey that they hunt. So having all that underwater noise is actually going to be very detrimental to the transient killer whales and our offshore killer whales that we have. And it's just going to like tarnish that connection that the people in the community have with Kakowin.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kat. Shane, let's go to you. Remind everyone what you do and same question. If you could be in one of these films, which one would it be and what would you be doing?
Yeah, okay. I am Shane Pollard. I'm the guardian manager for the Wewakai Nation based out of Camp River and Quadra Island. And my background varies a little bit to kind of like fisheries, forestry, and also the archaeology side. So I am going to be a little selfish with my choice. Because of the archaeology side, I got to see in the second video when they were visiting Guayhanas and Old Masset and seeing like the old totem poles in the forest and stuff. I just think that would be a great sight to see. So I'm essentially just sightseeing in my choice.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that we had a question Linda asked during the show, so we'll start with that one. Okay. Linda's question is, It seems as though the numbers in BC indicating support for the Alberta pipeline is greater than numbers opposing. It used to be the other way around. BC used to be more protective of our coastline and environment. I find it hard to reconcile this when the climate emergency is worse than ever. My question is, what are some misconceptions about tanker traffic and pipeline impacts in the general public? Shane, let's start with you.
I'm kind of fortunate being on the inside of Vancouver Island where tankers are originally banned, but we still have to deal with fuel and oil being transported on barges and stuff. So I'm not too sure about any misconceptions I could answer for that one. Sorry.
Kat, let's go to you. Can you think of any misconceptions that there are? You already educated us in some of the ways that whales hunt differently. What else can you tell us about misconceptions there might be?
One of them is that people look at, well, what's the alternative, right? And the alternative is rail to get it through, like say from Alberta to BC. But rails have more derailments than there are pipeline leaks. And so when I think people look at those numbers, it changes their perception and they think, well, maybe pipeline is the safer way to go. There's also a ton of research that says it's 4 to 5 times safer than rail. So then the question is, what is the alternative, right? We're meeting a demand. There's a demand for oil. We all use it. I'm guilty, right? My vehicle is still gas, right? I drive on pavement. So there's meeting that need and how do you do that? And it's basically like the lesser of the evils, I think is what it really comes down to. But I think the big shift in what's happening politically is just the rising geopolitical uncertainties, especially with the US, and then the desire for Canada to not be as dependent on the US. Um, and for like non-US markets, I think is just really changing things. I'm not sure if anyone's looked at the coastal marine strategy for BC. It's the first one that's ever been created. It got published just last year. But it addresses a lot of like concerns around oil and how to conserve the environment, marine environment, and that is something that is new for BC. So hopefully it's a document that will actually help guide BC onto a different path for that.
Thank you for that. John Nielsen, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thanks for the chance to ask a question. It's just with regards to the existing capacity. It seemed to me that it's been said that the Trans Mountain is not at capacity. So there's something like 30 to 40% of unused capacity, if I recall correctly. So it seems extremely foolhardy to consider building another pipeline when we haven't used all the capacity in the existing one.
Thank you. Yeah, does Shane or Kat, do you have anything to add to that? John, it sounded to me more, it sounded like a comment to me that you just wanted to add to the conversation. Is there a more specific question? We might be able to narrow that down a little bit.
Uh, it, no, that's fair to say that it is a comment, but it's one which would require some validation, I guess, if my recollection is correct. And if it is, the question might be, why is the question not being asked of our political leaders, and what would be their response?
Interesting. It's a great question, John, and a great thought too. And if it certainly if we're not using what we already have to to the full extent of its capacity, it would seem silly to be needing to build more. I do personally think that a lot of what was said was an attempt for the new government to appease the Albertan government a little bit and calm things down there. Um, and how much of it was just political posturing versus how much of it was something else is different, but it is really important for those of us in this writing to stay up to date and educated on these issues. And these films I thought were really important to remind us of what's going on and what's at stake. It's so easy to forget how these things aren't just some thing happening somewhere else. There are people and families whose lives depend on the decisions that are made. And it's really good to remind ourselves of that. Yes, Kat.
I'm putting my old engineering hat on for a moment, and the only thing that I can think of in this moment that would justify putting multiple pipelines in is just the redundancy in case of maintenance issues so that allows the oil to continue to be exported. That's the only thing that comes to my mind at this point.
Thank you. One of your many hats that we need to keep in mind. Let's see. Annie has a question in the chat and her hand up. So we'll let you pose your question.
Okay, I just wanted to add some information to John's question. And in the Tyee, there have been articles recently about dredging of Burrard Inlet to allow more tanker traffic and larger tankers. So if there was an increased volume coming through Trans Mountain, then that is an argument for dredging Burrard Inlet, which, having grown up there, I get sick to my stomach when I think of the effect that there would be in dredging through there. And having once been stuck on a boat that got wedged in between the pylons of the Second Narrows Bridge when I was a teenager, whoa, this is just the thought of big tankers going through there just freaks me out entirely. So that would be something to really consider, the impact of what dredging would do. So anyway, Mark also had a question.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a question, just some more thoughts about the matter that John rose. I think it's David Eby who's been pushing for shipping more bitumen through the Trans Mountain, and he's the guy that claims that it's only a 30 or 40% capacity, or 30 or 40% more space in there than what's being used. I don't know if the stats are accurate, but he's using that as something to counter the idea of building this or a new pipeline through the mountains. My concern about that, and I think it's shared by a lot of people, is first of all, it would require the expansion of the Burnaby terminal for the Trans Mountain and more storage facilities there. And it's already got enormous tanks perched on the edge of the ocean, the base of Burnaby Mountain, and not a safe place for that to be if there were ever any kind of accident, especially a fire, which has happened numerous times around the world. I've seen some amazing video of that. So that's a possibility. And boy, would that ever devastate not just the terminal, but an enormous part of Burnaby and possibly even up to SFU. And then, of course, there's the increased tankerage effect on the southern Georgia Strait or Salish Sea. We already know that those southern resident whales are so under threat. More tankers would threaten it even more. Meanwhile, the federal government has drastically scaled back its emergency response crews that are responsible for responding to oil spills or any kind of accidents. And as a cost-cutting measure, just I think a month or so ago, they really reduced the budget. I think most of the guys are laid off. They're on call now, so they're not sort of emergency ready. They'd have to be called up and rushed over there if there were the need for a response. So the whole system is so riddled with competing interests and conflicting goals. Perhaps the biggest thing in the public that I think is going on, or to my mind, is that the public in BC used to see the risk-benefit ratio in favor of the risk. The risks were bigger than the benefits we would get. And ever since this whole thing with Trump and world oil supplies and Canada's economic sovereignty and all of that stuff has risen to the fore, now the public's opinion or view of that has shifted so that the benefits outweigh the risks for many people. And I think that's the big shift, why there is a drop in support for banning pipelines or tankers and more in favor of them. It's just a matter of, the world geopolitics, as you've already said, Katrina. Also, the news that we're fed that kind of news, so people believe it so much. And I think that it can be really questioned just how serious it all is. How serious is Canada's sovereignty? Do we have to panic and start fast tracking all these mega projects and risking our environment? All of that? is that really necessary? I think we would be so wise to pause and think much more deeply about this and question what a lot of our politicians are feeding us, even what the media is feeding us, because I think the picture is far more complex and much deeper than what we typically are assuming these days. Anyway, those are just some thoughts. I don't really have an intelligent question. Sorry.
That's okay, Mark. Thank you. It was also really relevant to Linda's question as well. Shane, I've got this question from Annie. How do you
Yeah.
understand the role of community in defending our waterways?
Well, I know our nation we're more active in oil spill response and stuff like that as
Mm.
well too. So yeah, that's one thing we kind of take part. Actually, quite a good thing to point out is the oil spill response equipment on the coast is very scarce as well too. So one question I know is if a big spill did happen, like a lot of us nations, we wouldn't have the capacity to deal with a large spill. Like if for some reason there was a large tanker or something, but. Yeah, it's something we're playing a bigger role in. The community wants to see us play a bigger role with, especially having guardians now.
Can
So
you
as
talk a
we can
little bit
express
of,
their
can you,
voice, and now we can, they're the ones that are able to go out on the ground there for them. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
sorry, I was just going to ask, can you talk just for a second about the Guardian program and maybe explain to some of our guests here, if they're not familiar with it, what it is and what you do?
Okay, that's a tougher question to explain because in terms of guardians, we pretty much just do everything. Any type of stewardship work that goes on into the territory, the nation wants to have some type of involvement in it. So the guardians are essentially there to help assist and then learning different things on the way. So yeah, like I said earlier, we can go from forestry to fisheries to archaeology to many other different things. So it's hard to really put it like a category and say one thing we do. But we're essentially stewardship technicians for our nation is a good way of putting it.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
succinct. Thank you so much. Kat, do you have anything to add to your understanding of the role of community in defending our waterways?
I think it's more just that communities like the first line of defense, right? We kind of have this grassroots stewardship where we fill in kind of those gaps where there's government like oversight and we can use a lot of our local knowledge to leverage things and protect the land and seas. So KCFN also has a guardian program. We actually call it our WITWalk, which is Newfoundland word for warriors, and it is literally like their role was to protect the lands and waters. So we've honored that traditional practice, but instead it's protecting it from like anthropogenic damage and protecting the environment. So we do have members also in our community that are trained Indigenous-led auxiliary Coast Guard. So we will go out and we will respond to an oil spill while we wait for like the larger crew with the Coast Guard to come up. So we're like kind of like I see communities as a first line of defense, and it just shows that like everyone can play a role, right? Everyone has a role to play. There's more than one drop of water in the ocean, right? So it takes more than one person to protect and care for it.
Yeah, one thing when we were watching the second film especially, what I was reminded of was how Greenpeace was created, which was um, just some people in Vancouver trying to stop nuclear testing in the Aleutian Islands. So they all got in a boat that was kind of falling apart, but went up to just try to get in the way and to be there so that nuclear testing couldn't happen. And while they were up there, they saw all these whale carcasses on the beach of one of the islands because they never made it to where they were going. And then Greenpeace was born. But it just shows how like a small group of dedicated people can do big things. Jay, you've got your hand up. What's your question?
We're talking about diluted bitumen that we're going to put in a pipeline, and it's already been acknowledged here. We can't clean it up. So why are they pretending they have this ability to clean up spills, but diluted bitumen just sinks to the bottom of the ocean, will coat the ocean? How many millions of tons will be spread all over the ocean? So why, like, this cleanup thing is a facade, So I mean, I think we need to highlight it that there is no cleanup. It's basically a guarantee if there's a spill, there's a huge destruction of the whole West Coast. And so, how do we get this film these two films out in a bigger audience. So more people ask that question themselves. So it's not just because we're short of oil, we got to ship it out to everybody else. But really, this is a no-brainer, should be a no-brainer that, hey, we're just going to destroy the ocean wherever it gets spilled. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of the guests on this call will be members of the Green Party. And if you are, you probably saw that video from Elizabeth May where she explained how the difference between you can, put this in rail cars in a solid form, but you obviously can't ship it through a pipeline in a solid form. And when it's in solid form, it's much easier to clean up off the ground than this molassesy mess that you can't clean up and you can't even contain the same way that typical oil spills are cleaned up. It's a good question, Jay. And Shane and Kat, do you have other thoughts on what Jay has said there?
My other thought is just encouraging people to connect with the First Nation communities in your area, right? Because those are just two stories of what's happening, and there's so many other stories. There's a lot that nations are doing. Like KCFM, for one, we are doing actually an oil spill risk assessment in the territory on traditional food systems and determining what areas are at highest risk of an oil spill under certain like conditions, and then how we can do a rapid response so that we can get there so that if it is Dilbit, for Dilbit to clean up, you need to be there like immediately so you can skim before it sinks. Because then once it does sink, your only options are like doing diving and vacuuming, and then sometimes it just sits there and just decimates the entire area. So we are leading work on that. There is actually quite a few nations that are also doing work along that, and I think we'll all be making videos about it too. So I think it's finding out like what else is happening in your community and spreading the word that way.
Yeah, those are great ideas. And Linda has a question. I'll just switch a little bit. She's asking about whether the majority of coastal and interior First Nation bands oppose the pipeline and tanker traffic on our coast. And obviously, we don't have representatives here from everyone. So, if you guys could speak to the First Nations that you work with, do they have a position that is about the tanker traffic? Shane, you've already talked a little bit about how there's not much there
Yeah,
anyway.
no, I get to sit as a representative on a group that monitors cumulative effects of shipping and stuff like that. But other than just voicing our concerns, yeah, we're speaking for our band. We can pretty much just voice our concerns about it.
KCFN's views, from what I know, are we don't want anything that's going to impact KCFN's way of life, the health and well-being of the community, which includes the ocean and marine environment. One of the sacred principles that KCFN follows is Hishikasawak, which means everything is connected. And so we always try and do everything with that mentality and keeping it in mind when we if we were to support something or not support something, what the larger implications are for that. We see that there is going to be a risk to having tankers through and marine shipping, just even for other noxious substances apart from oil, right? Everyone focuses heavily on oil, but there's so many other things that can contaminate the marine environment. And so our look is from a larger scale, and we're just trying to do whatever we can to protect what resources we have, the culture of the people, and then just sadly, we're not really in a position where we can say, hey, nothing through here, but we're trying to fight for the territory as much as possible and its health.
You have both mentioned how you are trying to get additional resources. Kat, you mentioned it in the hydrophones, and Shane, you were talking about cleanup materials.
Yeah.
Why aren't you getting the help that you're needing? What is the federal government is just being non-responsive? What's going on? And where could you, if you could pick one place to get more help and more response, what would it be?
The federal government has helped us and gave us some equipment, but I just think it's so scarce on the coast that it's hard to get. I know if in case of a situation, we know some resources where we can rent equipment if need be, but
Mhm.
have some equipment that's ours on hand. We do have a little bit. that is thanks to DFO because they have they're limited capacity as well, so we can help them out there. Always more would be better though, because
For
we have
sure.
so many areas in our nation around our territory that we want to protect in case of an oil
Mhm.
spill to be boomed off with log boom and stuff like that. And we just don't have enough for it all if it does happen.
Okay. Kat, what about you?
Yeah, so we have for some of our work received funding from like the federal and provincial government to do certain things, and we've been given some equipment. Um, we did get training for the nation in marine mammal emergency response and certain things like for oil, like if oil spills were to happen and how it can impact them. But it comes to that there were budget cuts, so it was limited on how much equipment they could give.
Yeah.
For the marine mammal stuff, we were given the training but no equipment to actually then be able to utilize the training because of just the changes that happened with the Canadian Coast Guard going over to the Department of National Defense. It kind of shifted DFO's budget from what I was made aware. And then part of it for like a lot of the other stuff and just knowing what's happening in the territory and like the hydrophones and that data deficit is I think it's just that KCFN's so remote and we're not a huge tourist area. We're not Tofino. We're not, right? We it's a remote community, it's a small community. We get some people coming in to do fishing from May to mid-August when it's our peak, and then it just dies down and then it seems like it becomes forgotten. Um, and it's sad, but I think primarily it's just that it's a small per capita for most of the year, and there's just not enough of the flash that Tofino and the other southern areas get.
If the Green Party, if we could help in some way, what would it be? The people in this room right now, what would you like for us to take away that we could help KCFN with?
I would probably say it'd be leverage more money so that we can do the work that needs to be done. Sadly, it's money that makes things happen. We're all within budgets, right? So we have to kind
Mhm.
of prioritize what's most important, but it's also important. I get support when when we file for grant applications. Letters of support are always something that helps boost grant applications, but I don't entirely know, and that usually would be something that we would ask our hereditary chiefs or our leadership as to what direction they would want to go and what they would want from a political party.
Shane, what about you? The people in this room, let's set aside that
Yeah.
we're mostly Green Party people right now, but we're
Yeah.
people who are in this riding, who are interested in what's going on. What's something that we could do to support you and what your work is?
Ooh, I see we've only got a half hour left. No, mine would be, of course, money as well. Funding comes up. And then yeah, there's some few political things that we hope to get changed in the future. To hopefully see more from the First Nations perspective on those political changes so they can get moving in the direction we hope.
Annie's got a question. Are there First Nations coalitions on the East Coast and West Coast? And I'm guessing of the island, you mean Annie? Um, and if so, how do they work together?
For the east and west coast of Vancouver Island or like
Yeah,
Canada? Okay.
of Vancouver Island.
Well, there is for all of Canada, though, the Assembly of First Nations, which they advance collectively, things that affect all First Nations, for the coast. For KCFN, we are part of the Manalth Modern Treaty. So we have five other nations that we collaborate, sorry, four other nations that we collaborate a lot and try and work together on. And then there's also the Neutral and the Tribal Council for along the entire West Coast. Um, as for things that kind of happen in amongst with the West, it's usually through like engagements with the province and the federal government that is when we really tend to engage. Otherwise, it's through that Assembly of First Nations, and then sometimes work through the First Nation Fisheries Council. They often bring the, all the First Nations together to talk about certain topics and advance certain initiatives.
Yeah, in our area, we're actually pretty lucky. There's a few different nations that kind of all work collectively together. And then if you go up a little further, there's kind of like the North Island, Central Coast, and then Haida Gwaii. And then every few times a year, all of us groups will get together for conferences and workshops like that. So there are different coalitions working together.
What other questions does anybody have or thoughts they had on the movies?
I'll just chime in. One thing I
Yeah.
found interesting about the second movie is that they chose paddle boards, mainly because I just would have thought it would be canoes because of how important canoes are actually are. The canoe races are actually like the one thing that was not canceled when settlers first arrived in Canada. I'm not sure if people were aware of that. They just thought they were races and they was a sport, so they didn't realize that it meant so much to the culture and there was like a ceremony attached to it. So I was just surprised that it went with paddle boards over canoes, especially since now many of the First Nations are participating like the tribal canoe journeys just to keep that going, and they're trying to get the youth more involved with that. So I was quite surprised that it went paddle boards rather than the canoe and the whole process of doing the dugout canoes and carving the canoe, something that was more culturally tied to First Nations was very interesting. But it is nice to learn something new. But that did that did kind of make me go, oh, I wonder why they didn't pick the canoe.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I wonder how much it was tied to knowing that that journey was happening on that paddleboard through that road. But that's a really interesting point, and I didn't know that about the canoe races. Do Shane or Kat, do either of you have any questions for us?
My only question would be if people were interested in being involved and helping with the nations and their work, like what what would that look like for them? Like what kind of involvement would they want? Um, I think everyone realizes that we all need to help each other and everything like that, but sometimes people that are not within the community or work for the nation can sometimes be a little apprehensive about approaching to offer help because they're worried they're being turned away, and that's not the case. Um, and so it would be interesting to know like how would people want to help, so that maybe as nations we could also spread the word like, hey, we are looking for people to assist us with this and this and this. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think what's funny is that we're all very eager to help and are just kind of waiting for someone to ask us for help, and it kind of goes both ways. And I think we one lesson we can learn is that nobody's ever going to be mad at you for offering help either. Um, and I can tell you, Kat, from my participation with with the Green Party and with our board and the people on this phone call, um, is that we are a mighty force of letter writers. So if you need support letters for grants that you're working on, let us know. I think we can stay in touch too. Um, I sign up for all kinds of newsletters with groups that I'm not necessarily a member of just to stay on top of what's going on. So if there are newsletters that the First Nations that your nations have that go out and they're just open to anybody to sign up, we could sign up and see what needs to be done when and see how that might fit for us. Um, and you could do the same and sign up for ours. We're always looking for volunteers and for help in different ways and to try to figure out how to do more of this advocacy and how to reach more people. And this goes back to Jay's point of sharing these videos, and we're going to keep doing this with bigger audiences. How do we get them? And to have these conversations so that we can educate each other and hear different viewpoints. I think it's so important. Our writing is massive, but it's also small. There aren't a lot of us here. So geographically huge, but population wise, not. So we should be more connected with each other and we should be helping each other more. And I think that that's a great point. And I hope that we continue these conversations and continue to hear from each other and offer our help and ask for help when we need it too. Um, and and continue to grow from this point. So thank you for that question. It's been really lovely to spend this time with you. Um, I loved watching the movies together. I think we can only improve upon them from here and this was a great place to start. But it was really nice to spend this time. Thank you to everyone. Thank you especially to Shane and Kat so much for your time and your thoughts tonight. Really, really nice to spend this time with you.
And I think my email got shared if people have questions after the fact. I'm usually one of those people that I think of 20 million things after I've left a room. Feel free to send me an email. No problem.
Yeah, same thing for
Awesome.
me. Thank you guys for having me. And I believe I did see my email in the chat as well. So
Great. Thank you for sharing it and letting us share those out. And thanks everyone else. Enjoy your evening and have a great weekend as well.